Okay. Sandra, you had a question for Kieran. Do you want to ask it? You can ask it to him verbally.
Yeah, I felt the one-stop shop comment you made is really spot on. I was wondering if in that shop only financial instruments should be found, or a broader set of tools like know what to do to your house, how to get it done. Well, what's the first step? All of that, and then if that is the case, who's the shopkeeper?
Good question. In some instances, it might be a local or regional government that would provide this, but clearly it has to be not just the financing mechanism, it's the how-to toolkit of what you might do, technologically speaking. Do you need insulation? Do you need a heat pump? Do you need to have integrated e-charging for your car? All of this can be part of what's offered. In some instances, it's literally a window and a door and a kind of a ground floor unit within an apartment complex. In other instances, it's an online facility or a website that people go to. Sometimes it'll be a person who will call around to your door and say, I'm from local government and I'm here to help you. In other instances, you might go to a physical location and have a chat across the desk with somebody. But it's not just about the financing instrument, it's about the physical measures that you might think about. I mean, for instance, people think about a deep renovation and they think about an electric car, but they rarely think about the two together. So maybe it's a package that includes both of these, the mobility as well as the building.
Yeah. Thank you. Peter, you wanted to come back in as well, and Murray too.
So thanks.
Peter,
yeah, I've been listening intently, and I think this has been a fantastic discussion. Murray mentioned something, and Kieran, you also mentioned something which I think is important to add to mortgage portfolio standards. Sonia, when you said what is the most common question I get, I think very often people who've been talking about energy efficiency in buildings for a long time sort of fall into the trap of, or you can be trapped in dealing with a element or component of the market, and then the question comes and it's about another component of the market. So mortgage portfolio standards are designed to deal with 50 million of the market. There are 220 million households in Europe. So this is an instrument that may be useful for, I don't know, 30%, 40%, half the market. So let's not make the mistake of saying that something that's well designed for half the market has to also deal with the other half of the market. There is an absolute need for recovery money and grants to be paid to upgrade the homes of energy poor and the people who are in elements of society that can't get a mortgage. So let's be clear. And that, I think, has been well recognized by governments in terms of their recovery and resilience plans, for example. Now, I think there's a gap in the middle, which is people who perhaps are suffering and that can't make payments to their bills every week, haven't got the time to get a mortgage, or so there's this middle sort of group of people who may not be well banked, may be living in debt and so on, who need, I think, a new instrument, which Murray hinted at, which I call the EU renovation loan. Now, without going into this, think of the amount of money that European governments were offered at EU costs of funds. So the EU just launched a green bond, I noticed, that was hugely oversubscribed, 135 billion euros of investors waiting to give the EU their money. So maybe that money could be channeled at the EU's cost of funds, which is nearly 0%, to the people who can't afford regular loans. So those people can get renovation loans provided through European systems to do deep renovations, and in my design of that instrument, on a zero coupon basis. Now, zero coupon just means you don't pay until the end. What does that mean? That means that you get the money to do a deep renovation, irrespective of your income status, your bankability status, what have you. you pay a tiny amount that gets rolled up towards the end. So an example would be, if you borrow 20,000, you pay off 23,000 after 30 years. 23,000 after 30 years, having paid nothing in the interim, is effectively EU borrowing rates. We don't get access to that as regular citizens, but we could. If member states were to get around an EU renovation loan, which would be a complementary financial instrument, thereby answering the question that financial institutions and banks say, which is, what about these people who we'd love to see renovate their homes but can't afford it? Answer: EU renovation loan. Thanks.
Murray,
maybe also just to add, I think a renovation loan could also help with people who are close to or in retirement, because banks can't really provide a new mortgage or new mortgage lending to somebody who's in retirement, and also there are many people who don't have a mortgage; they just own a building, and perhaps they don't want to take on more debt, or they're not able to. And so that could also be a part of it, and I agree. Like this is for a mortgage portfolio standards for part of the market, and it shouldn't do everything. Banks should be looking at their entire mortgages and all their customers and seeing how they can improve their buildings. But I had a question for Sandra. You very correctly pointed out that member states' policies in this area are not sufficient, and has your MPS sort of encouraged you to engage more with the Dutch government or the Belgian government or on the details of their energy efficiency and policies, and what do you think your counterparts in other banks would sort of think about an MPS type policy if it were to come and as a policy proposal?
Very good question. So I can't speak for the other banks, to be honest. I think if you're already on the trajectory of like many others have of disclosing a voluntary MPS, I think you would not be opposed on making this more of a standard. To your first question, have you interacted more? Not an awful lot more, to be very honest. And I think just by being very transparent on how we calculate and actually showing that gap, that conversation should actually be started. But I think it should be multiple conversations. So yeah, looking forward to having that more.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to wrap up soon. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I wondered if anyone, maybe Peter, your best place, wanted to come back on the question Paula left us with earlier, and you're still there, I hope, Paula. I hope there's been some answers to your questions, which was how an MPS could link specifically to these minimum emission performance standards for buildings, which are something that are definitely, that the EU definitely wants to take forward. Do you have any thoughts on that to wrap up?
If that's a question to me, I think it's like a hand in a glove. So the Commission has said they're going to establish minimum energy performance standards. To me, that means that large swathes, or in the countries like France, the UK, Holland, where we've seen those types of measures, it's created a great shift in value. So very quickly, it becomes clear that you have to do a renovation if you're in a certain energy performing building. Therefore, the cost of that renovation, net of its energy savings, becomes attached to the value of the building, and the markets quite quickly react to that. So I think that's not actually a bad thing, because if people have mentioned the affordability of housing, there is an asset bubble going on right now. So the idea that actually bringing down house prices by the amount of a deep renovation to enable those who live in those houses to pay lower bills and to kickstart jobs markets locally in line with the Green Deal all sounds like a good thing. So I think that what I would say is that perhaps we're looking at this, perhaps the ambition that we're looking for or calling for is for policymakers to think outside the box. I mean, one of the things about energy efficiency, I think, is we've never I'm calling for these types of, should we say, slightly innovative or different approaches, because I think it's what's needed. Because if we just have more of the same, even if we turn up the dial, I just don't think it's going to work.
Yeah, more of the same I don't think is going to work, because that's what the second revision to EBPD and the EED was about, and more funding has come in, which is all great, and there's many more programs. But the IEA shows over the last 3-4 years, energy efficiency investment has been going down. And so I think we do need new types of policies. That's what the climate emergency and what the renovation wave demands.